Hey, Plain Talk listeners, do you have a question, comment, or something you want us to discuss on the show?
We want to hear from you.
Leave a voicemail or send a text to 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Today I want to start with a little bit of a rant about our producer, Matt. He insists that we have to have these social media video clips. And what this has done, previously the guest hosts, Corey Mock and Jessica Bell, were complaining about having to listen to their own voice. I now have to open social media and see my stupid face holding forth about something, talking very animatedly about stuff with my hands and everything. No, I am yet to be convinced that this is going to help with the podcast at all. And I go back to when I started with the forum, when they were originally running my columns, they would always put my giant stupid face at the top of every column. And so it gets shared on social media. It's like itty bitty headline, big stupid. It was never cropped right. So it was like my nostrils or something. I thought, like, this is not moving copy. Nobody wants to see this. This is not what I have to offer the world. But anyway, we're doing it now to these video clips.
I want to start out with agreeing with you.
Yeah. So
Everything you just said, including your big stupid face, not selling copy.
So we're the talent, if we could call ourselves talent, which might be gilding the lily a bit. We are revolting against our producer Matt, who insists that we have to have these. Anyway, if you're seeing the clips,
Twice a week, Rob, I have to look presentable.
Twice a week.
This is nonsense. I like to just show up and talk smart. I don't want to have to look like I don't know. No, presentable and looking good are two very different things. But I don't think either of us, our mugshots, are doing much good for the content.
We are a minute and 30 seconds into this podcast, and we are off the rails already. We're going to get down to business. And that business, actually, it worked out absolutely perfectly because we got a little bit of reader feedback to our phone number, which, by the way, you could call in and leave voicemails, or you could send text messages to. We'll get them. We'll react to them on the air. Kelsey writes in and she says, "Hello. When Measure 4 didn't pass, many people said that they would have voted for it if the measure had stated that only residential property tax would be eliminated. Does this sound like a viable option for North Dakota? Why or why not? As luck would have it," and I swear to God, we didn't plan this. As luck would have it, we actually have on Gary Eminent, who wrote a column recently making that argument that what the legislature, since the voters said no to Measure 4, what the legislature ought to do is eliminate property taxes on residential properties. Gary, how are you?
I'm good, Rob. Good to be on your show.
Well, we have one listener who wants to know why that's the way to go. So maybe I'll just let you start out. Make your case. Why is that the way?
I would love that. Rob, one thing I would say, Chad, the other thing is I heard a lot from people. I moderated a debate on Beck. I heard a lot of people and did a lot of interviews. I was actually supporting Measure 4, but I was worried it was a bridge too far. And to be honest with you, my sense of it was if we could just help North Dakota who live in their home, that are private property owners, that if we could give them a break. People are frustrated that there's been all this revenue and sometimes they feel they haven't got the benefit of it, and they appreciate the idea that we have this trust fund that we're putting forward in the legacy fund for our grandchildren. But could I get a little bit myself right now? And as I was thinking through it, I thought, why don't we at least give the property owners that are in their home an opportunity to get that break? And what I made my case that it's about $1 billion in the biennium. I had talked to Jim Casper just recently, and he claims that the legislative council, they said it's only about $400 million per year, about 800 of the biennium. So it's even less than I thought. And I'm of the opinion the legislature cannot help themselves. They have the money, they're going to spend it. And so if you don't take it away from them, they're going to spend it. So I think this is a great way to get back to North Dakotans. The thing I didn't make in the column, Rob, you write for the Forum. And of course, in the Forum, you don't always, you get to have long form. I get 500 words. And the thing I missed in my column that I really meant to say, and it never dawned on me, is the legislature needs to make up that gap. If it's 800 million, if it's $1 billion, whatever that number is, if they come to it, they ought to make up that gap so the local school districts, county, cities, that funding is taken out of the general fund and kind of frozen. And it turns out that Jim Casper's got a bill that actually does that. I didn't even know it when I wrote my column. So that's where I'm at. I think it's the citizens it's time for us to give them something meaningful, and this would be meaningful.
So Gary, I read your column. Obviously, I was very much involved in the anti-Measure 4 work. And so, I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, the opponents of Measure 4 didn't say once during the whole campaign that they liked property taxes. So this idea that you start your column by saying everybody who is against this likes paying property taxes is completely unfair. Secondly, so basically your column says the people who are against Measure 4 are special interests and they duped people with out-of-state money. The voters, don't know what's good for them. And by the way, the legislature never does anything that the voters want them to do. And here's my idea. I'm unclear. Of this column was, why don't these politicians for once just do what the citizens want? So here's my question though, Gary. The people against this are terrible. The voters were duped. The legislators never do anything that we want them to do. But here's my idea. Why don't you guys all get on board? I'm not sure that's the best political strategy to bring people on board to your policy idea.
Fair enough, Chad. Listen, when I put it out there was mostly to create discussions like this and others. I have heard there's going to be almost 50 bills on property tax. I hope it doesn't come down to that. As you know, and Rob, every bill goes through committee, ends up on the floor, up and down votes, still get voted every time. The people can twist those facts to say they were for it, they were against it. And what I was really doing was picking on the legislators, and I'm really frustrated with the funding and the spending. And I interviewed Dale Wetzel, and one of Dale Wetzel's famous lines that he says to me regularly a couple of years ago during the Legislature Day show I did, he said, legislators will never eliminate permanently a tax because they can do an exemption, they can do this thing, they get to brag about it. Because once they've eliminated the tax one time, it's done. They can't talk about it anymore of how they're saving the taxpayers. And so I don't think it's fair to say that I said legislators didn't do anything right. I just said in this instance, I think this would support this by a wide majority. And I felt that Becker's group were way outspent. Pat Finken and the gang and their campaign that you were part of outspent, and a lot of out-of-state money came in. And it's kind of like reversing it, Chad. I'll put it back to you. It's like if I don't take this other position, I'm against teachers, I'm against education, I'm against state employees. That's not a fair statement. Just because I make a statement that the legislature just spends too much money and they won't make the cut and give it back to the taxpayer.
So Rob, before I just have to fact check, Pat Finken had nothing to do with the campaign. The out-of-state money that you're talking about were the realtors and teachers who have members in the state, and those members in the state asked them to contribute. So let's be a little bit honest about the campaign. And I know the ins and outs of who was involved and who wasn't, and Pat Finken was not involved in the Measure 4 campaign.
Oh, fair enough. I'll give you that pass. I have talked to him about it, and I assumed he was in the middle of it like he was against Measure 5. And anyway, I'll leave it at that, and I stand corrected.
Let me. We've reached a low moment when I have to rise to defend the integrity of the electorate. But I don't think, given my normal attitude about like ballot measures and stuff, I don't think voters were duped on this at all. I think they understood exactly what was before them and they rejected it. And I think they rejected it for two reasons, Gary, one of which you identified. I think having Rick Becker be the face of it was a mistake. I think he's unpopular and polarizing. And I think there's a lot of, I talked to a lot of people who are just like, I don't trust that guy. I don't think he helped. But I think the other thing is with Measure 4, I think you're right, Gary. I think it went a bridge too far for a lot of people. And I think you're right. I think something like eliminating it just for residences could pass. I think it has a very strong shot. That's certainly a better shot than Measure 4 did. But let me ask you this, because I mean, generally, when I think about tax policy, like one rule of thumb for me is I want taxes to be low and I want tax bases to be broad, because I think that people should have skin in the game when it comes to paying for their government. So when I think about the sorts of things that the property taxes fund, it's a lot of local services, and I'm wondering why people who live in those communities should be exempted from paying for it. And I realize the state tax dollars are their tax dollars too, but that's not as direct, right? I mean, that money is going, it's not as visible. So I guess from that, talk to me a little bit from that perspective, where that's, and I'm not saying it rules me out being against this, but that's something that gives me concern is, aren't we narrowing the tax base quite a bit by doing this? And what does it mean for the business community? Aren't we putting a lot more tax burden on their backs?
Well, first of all, Rob, I don't think we do, because if the state funds that $800 million that Casper uses as the number, that $800 million, I think they could cut 800 out of the 19.5 Doug Burgum presented. We know the legislature is going to spend 20.5. They always spend more than the governor's budget. And we don't know where Kelly's going to end up on this, what he's going to fight for. But I don't think that $800 million will be noticed by a single citizen. And I think if we put that $800 million back in the pockets of all the citizens that own property in the state, I think it's going to be money that's going to churn over multiple times, whether people use it to put the kids in college, remodel their house. Sure. Now, one of the concerns, I talked to Dustin Goverlow, and I think he has a valid point. He says, listen, if someone's got a house that they're paying $3,000 in property taxes, and let's say the house worth $300,000 for easy math, and I got $1 million house and I'm paying $10,000, he thinks it ought to be a fixed amount. So maybe you put a house number at $500,000 and anything below it, and come up with some number related to that, so it's across the board even, where someone with a bigger property gets a bigger break. And there's some merit in it. But the thing I'm after is, could we just keep something very simple, keep it clean, and not complicated? Because the reason people struggle is this levy. And what is a mill levy and how does it work? And then from one city to the next. And it's a frustration from many taxpayers. And I'll add one other thing. I do think Rick Becker was not the best face on it. In fact, I had talked to a gentleman right before the election who was supporting it, but he just said, I'm struggling with Rick because he scares me. And so I think there should have been a different face on it. I like Rick. He's a friend of mine, but he does polarize people.
Let me push back a little bit, because the idea that, we're not going to miss that $800 million from the state budget. I mean, maybe now when we still have oil tax revenues, but it scares me how dependent we are on oil tax revenues. And so that to me sounds like putting more eggs in one basket, which exacerbates a problem that I don't think we've even begun to grapple with yet. So I guess I'm thinking long term. In this moment, would we miss the money? No. But I mean, the golden goose is laying a lot of eggs right now. What happens when it stops?
Fair enough. I just say that the legislature, 10 years ago, the budget was about $10.5 billion, $11 billion. Today it's 20. And I'm just using round numbers. I don't think everything's doubled in 10 years. Our state employees have gone from 11,000 to 16,000 full-time employees. I just think that state government has grown so much. If you don't take it off the table, they will spend it. Yeah. And I am just concerned that legislators just like to take money back home. It's no different than Washington. And we've become that way in North Dakota because we've had so dang much money, Rob.
I did laugh a little bit during Burgum's budget presentation, which and I'm not even sure why we did that budget presentation. He's not going to be governor when all this is happening. But he had a chart and he was comparing spending growth. And he was like, spending only grew 1.7% over my administration. It's like, well, yeah, when you compare it to the last oil boom budget, yes, I guess that's right. We're just finally getting back up to oil boom levels. Every budget we've had under Doug Burgum has increased spending. We've increased spending, my math was 37%. Population grew 3%. So I agree with you. We've been spending a lot of money.
So I think, one of the issues with property taxes is it is complicated. And, Rob and I have talked a lot about this. I think during the Measure 4 conversation, I had debates with people who are proponents, and we agreed on about 90% of the stuff. I agree with what you're saying about we need to do something about property taxes. We need to do something about mills. I don't know how many times I've said, what the hell is a mill? Bills aren't equal everywhere. I think we can look at exemptions and how we're doing exemptions. But the thing I worry about is we make this, your column made this simpler than it actually is. I think Goverlo pointed out one thing, right? I mean, eliminating just personal property taxes on one person doesn't mean the same thing everywhere. So how do we make sure that it's fair? My question, just a really quick question. One of the things I've heard from Kelly Armstrong and others is the people who supported Measure 4 are never going to be happy. So, like, what is the percentage, like, that you would say your property taxes go down by 50%? Do you think that's a good number? Is it 25%? What is what is the threshold that you see that would make people say, okay, yup, they've actually done something?
Chad, that's a great question. I mean, the Senate and the House fight between income tax and property tax. I don't really hear people grumbling about our income tax. I mean, I hear all the time property tax, and the frustration, I think, is, hey, I'm 66 now, so I'm starting to think about fixed income, and I'm starting to think about this ad valorem that they put on how houses go up. Hey, our mill levy stayed the same for the last three,
Agreed.
yeah, but your house went from 300 to 500. Well, I didn't do anything with it. I'm just, and so that's a tax increase. And I think the challenge of that is, what is that number that it just keeps adjusting, and citizens don't understand it. And they go, wait a minute, I didn't do anything to my house for 10 years and my taxes keep going up. And I'm opposed to these buy downs, because these buy downs are just one time until next time. And I'm not saying my idea is the best. I just put it out there to say, could we give the residents a break long term? Because if somebody's paying 3-4 grand property tax for 20 years, I mean, at the end of the day, that money stayed in that family's pocket to do what they wanted with it. The state can afford it. And I'm telling you, the oil is going to be around for 20 to 25 years. It may not always be at the level, but maybe the legislators should just get some spending in check so we don't have to deal with those concerns that you have, Rob, about putting all that dependency on the oil industry.
One thing too, to your point, it's the property when they're taxing valuation increases, those are taxes on unrealized gains as well. It's like taxing me because my Exxon stock went up 25%. Well, that's great, but if I don't sell my Exxon stock, I don't have that money. It's the same with my house. If they say my house is worth $50,000 more, okay, I don't have $50,000 more in the bank. The only way I have it is if I sell my house, and assuming I can sell it for what they say it's worth anyway. So to me, I think valuations don't get enough attention in this problem here.
Agree.
And there's a part of me that thinks, how can we take that out? I mean, I guess caps are one way, which everybody we've had on, House Minority Leader Zach Ista, Senate Majority Leader Hogue, everybody is saying we're getting caps. So I feel like that's coming. I guess that's one way to do it. Representative Ben Koppelman from West Fargo, he's talked about taxing property size. I think I don't know how I feel about that entirely. I think depending on which day you ask me, I'm on the fence on that one. I don't know how I feel about it, but to me, it seems like I really don't want to decouple people from what their local government is costing them. I think that is so important. And I worry that if we shift it all up to the state, the average citizen is going to be decoupled from the reality of what their local government's costing them. And so I would like to keep it. And to me, I think the bugaboo is valuation. Stop taxing people for unrealized gains. I think that would help so much. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I think that's the biggest problem. I met with Rod Backman, who was OMB director, and we had a lot of discussion. He reached out to me like a year ago about this measure, and he was initially really thinking it was a good thing because he hated this valuation that was kept going up in your home. And he was just that ad valorem was a thing. And as time went on, he was talking like he was supporting it. And then he goes, I just don't see how the budget can make it work. So he goes, hey, I'm coming out against it. I said, well, that's okay. Because back to my point, it's a bridge too far. But these exemptions, they go, whether it's, people that are in agriculture get an exemption for their home property. Maybe if you're a veteran or, next time is the teacher. I mean, I appreciate all those people need to put more money in their pocket. And I'm just saying, and I get it. If somebody's renting a home, they'd lose the benefit of that. Maybe apartment people aren't getting that. There are some inequities in it. I just put it out there because I think the legislature needs to think about reform, and it needs to be aggressive and strong, or the citizens are going to eventually upright. They're going to take over, because one way or the other, whether it's through term limits or not, they're going to get control, and they're going to see enough's enough.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that I've been saying during the campaign and then after the campaign, that the legislature damn well better do something here, and it's got to be significant, right? I mean, I just applied for the $500 primary tax resident credit. I'm not going to pass up $500, but that's not going to suffice for very long. So I think looking at the 60 mil buy down for K through 12, I think capping, I think figuring out how to even out those evaluations, because the frustration I heard often when talking about this is, I don't do anything in my house and it doesn't go up, then all of a sudden it goes up 20% one year. I can't plan for that. So one of the things that you did not talk about in your column regarding primary residency is ag land. I mean, you talked about how farmers' residents, they don't pay on property taxes, but they often are the biggest property taxpayers. If you want to build a school in rural North Dakota, it's often 3 or 4 or 5 big farmers that are paying for this. Would you see doing something about ag land property taxes being part of it as well?
Chad, one of the things why I also put in my column that I think the state ought to underwrite and fund education at 100%. I think it's about 20% of the funding. I think it's about, I don't know, you know better than me, is it 14 or 16,000 a student the state funds for education? I think the state funds about 80% of it. I mean, we got that land trust fund that's probably pushing $7 billion. I mean, it's a big number. I mean, I think that contributed $500 million was the number last biennium to the budget, the funding education. That's going to keep growing. I think I talked to Tom Beadle recently, state treasurer, and he said that they believe the assets that the land trust have is still $2.5 billion more dollars, but just extrapolate that over the course of the next 20 years of oil, that's going to grow. But why? If we actually underwrote education at 100%, which is the second point of my column, that would be an addition separate from the homeowner. That would allow the tax cut to happen to the business and the ag people, because if they are paying and the state funds that education piece. Now, if the school district just say, oh, wow, we got an extra 20%, let's spend that too. That's the problem. So that's why it's a little tricky. And in 500 words, it's very difficult to make all your points. And I just use it to pick on the legislators a little bit. So I appreciate your comment.
One point on that is schools are the only ones that have caps, right? They're the only ones who have caps right now. It's cities and counties who don't have caps. And school districts, they can only fund schools through property taxes. Cities have sales tax and all those other things. So I think thinking about in Common Schools Trust Fund, Gary, I'm glad you brought that up. That is one of the best things that the state of North Dakota has, because eventually it's going to be paying for 100% of education, and we're not going to have to worry about taxpayer dollars to fund education.
Yep, that is a great thing. And that goes back to statehood, and I think the founders of North Dakota had no clue what this thing would be today, and the genius of it, quite remarkable. It's awesome.
One of the great things I like about the Common Schools Trust Fund, this is not related really to what we're talking about, but a lot of people don't understand that, like, if you get a traffic ticket from the Highway Patrol, that goes to the Common Schools Trust Fund. A lot of people don't know that, and it was actually designed that way to stop policing for profit, right? People complain all the time that certain places. Now the one exemption to that, though, is that if the reason why so many communities have municipal courts is that if it's a municipal law enforcement officer and you go to a municipal court for your fine, then they get to keep that money, which I think it all ought to go in the Common Schools Trust Fund, because I think that's a great way to do it, and it funds our schools, which or should be funding our schools maybe more than it is. One thing that again, I'm really struggling with the idea of disconnecting people from what they're paying for. And I wonder how does it work too, where we're narrowing. I guess that's the problem with this that I can't get over. But then also the thing that we haven't talked about at all, which I think everybody on this call knows, that specials don't really have anything to do with your property tax as a matter of policy. But I don't know that the general public appreciates that. And in some ways, that's fair, because they're thinking it's all it's all coming out of my pocket, and you're asking me to treat these things like they're different. They're not that different to me. Specials are something that I think people get whammied by a lot, where they're going along and then all of a sudden they decide, well, we need new street lights in this. This was a big thing in Minot not that long ago. We need new street lights, and then everybody gets whammied with this huge bill that they got to pay. Should that be part of this as well? Because I feel like that's driving it. Again, it doesn't get talked about, but people in their minds, when they're upset about property taxes, a lot of times they're thinking about specials.
Well, the thing I would say about specials is that if it's specific to a project, if it's paving, sidewalks, lights, I can see the benefits, and it tends to be around the property owners that are benefiting from it. So you see some benefit. It's just that when my property taxes go up and I don't really have a way to argue because I'm just one tiny little minnow in this big sea, this big ocean, if you will, I have no impact. But at least in specials, the cities, and they can kind of come in and argue about it. Washburn just put a deal together for a big addition to the school. I hear grumbling on one side they shouldn't have done it. Other people are feeling great about it. But at least if it's back to the local, and Rob, I appreciate your point that if there's a disconnect and I own a home and I don't pay any property tax, I drive up and down the roads and all that, I still pay gas tax. I pay sales tax. I'm paying income tax. I mean, they want to tax me for everything. And I'm just saying, if we go back to the whole idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of, or I guess that was supposed to be property taxes. I'm not property tax, but own of personal property. And so my point of having personal property is a great thing for Americans that we want to promote. And I just think it goes a long way to helping a lot of people on fixed income. We got the money. I say, let's give it to them.
Well, the Measure 4 committee, I actually got a hold of the minutes from one of their last meetings. And they were actually against your idea for exempting.
Well, they want no property tax. Yeah. They want it all gone. I get it.
But some of their other proposals I thought were really good. No more foreclosures on property. They'd instead go to like putting liens on property instead of foreclosing and keep kicking people out. They want to get rid of mills and just, I'm assuming, going to just like a dollar figure or maybe a percentage. Some of their reform ideas I thought were really, really good. And, I hope they're part of the debate. And I think some of that too is, I think people get really ideological about this and they get stuck on, if it's not everything I want, then I'm against it. And I think if that's anybody's attitude in this, you're not going to ever be satisfied by this debate because there's too many moving parts to just make any one faction and give them everything that they want. You're just not going to get it. There's so many complicated things. Gary, thank you so much for coming on, though. Really appreciate the conversation.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it. Like I said, it's not a silver bullet. It was out there. So we get debate, and I'm hoping the legislators come to some conclusions of cutting property taxes and cutting spending. I'd be for all that. So thanks, guys.
I think all three of us can agree on one thing. The legislature better do something on property taxes this year.
Amen. I think Kelly Armstrong is going to help lead the charge. I hope.
I agree.
Hopeful.
It sure seems like he's taking it seriously. All right, we're going to end it there. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
All right, welcome to the second half of Plain Talk. And, at the beginning of the show, I should probably do a good job of, setting it up, who we're going to be. We actually have two guests today. So for the second segment, we're actually going to be talking to State Representative Eric Murphy from Grand Forks, who from here on out will be called Murph, which is his preferred. Everybody knows Murph. Everybody likes Murph. So we're obviously the abortion issue. It's always, it seems like it's, we're always doing stuff with it. Obviously right now, a lot of it's in the courts because the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the Roe v. Wade precedent. That means that we are, some laws in North Dakota went on the books. We've tweaked them a little bit. There's ongoing litigation. And where that all stands now is a challenge to North Dakota's existing law is sitting before the state Supreme Court. We don't know how any of that's going to go. But we do have an upcoming legislative session. And for that legislative session, Representative Murphy he's bringing a bill. And essentially what it would do in broad strokes, and I'll let Representative Murphy fill in the details, but essentially what it would do is it would make abortion legal up to 15 weeks. And then I think there's another window after that, and then there's some exemptions. And I will tell you that, well, first of all, I tell you what, Representative Murphy, why don't you, first of all, describe what does your bill do?
Yeah. So the reality is I'm taking a total perspective from a healthcare angle, right? And so we're more focused on making it elective between conception through really through 15 weeks, right? And the purpose behind that is ultimately more focus on healthcare. Most women, especially an older woman, will be having a level of genetic testing at week 10 with results at week 11. What is her choice if she has a trisomy 13 baby, which was recently in the news because of the NFL player for the San Francisco 49ers had twins actually with trisomy 13. So what's the choice? This is almost always a lethal birth defect. What's the choice for that couple? Right now, they have no choice in North Dakota. None. They have no options. Their option is we can go to Minnesota or to another state. And so I'm looking at this really through that lens of healthcare. And then from 16 through 26 weeks, the idea is there, once again, a lot of deformities don't show up. They're seen on that 20-week ultrasound. And, many of those are not consistent with a live birth or a birth that's a baby's going to survive for very long. Currently, women are being sent out of state by their obstetricians to other states, principally from Grand Forks. They're going to Minnesota. And they should be getting that health care here in the state. That baby is going to be, D&C is going to be done regardless of whether it's being done in Grand Forks or it's being done in Minneapolis. Okay. And then after that, it's just merely for any situation where a baby has to be delivered, through C-section or, that they would have to try to save both the mother and the baby. For instance, for an emergency issue, let's say hemorrhaging or something like that, we have to work to save both the baby and the mother after 27 weeks on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm going to call you Representative Murphy for the first time, then I'll go with Murph the rest of the time. But I want to start out by saying thank you for bringing this conversation forward, looking at it from a healthcare perspective, right? I mean, this is often seen as just sort of a black and white issue of pro-life and pro-choice, and we often forget about that not every pregnancy goes perfectly. And so thank you, first of all. But we also know this is a very politically charged conversation. Even when the story in the North Dakota Monitor came out, there's some folks on the pro-life side who said, absolutely not, non-starter, this ain't going anywhere. I'm interested in the conversations you've had with your colleagues, particularly on the Republican side, about this bill. Do you expect some of them to be co-sponsors, or how do you see this playing out politically?
Yeah, and I've talked with a lot of my colleagues who would be considered more moderate to what I'll call moderate conservative Republicans, maybe fiscally conservative, maybe a little more socially liberal, perhaps, but nonetheless, Republicans. And, people think it's time to have the conversation. I mean, we have to move forward as a state. And the pro-life crowd I've had pro-life legislators talk to me and they're like, oh, I've never really thought about it through that lens. I think only of it as, you went out, you got pregnant, got your cross to bear in life. They really don't understand all the health perspectives around obstetrics care and all the problems that occur. And I thought it was very apropos that Tony Bender's last musings were about this very issue. And they're relating his story because that story is being played out, if not daily, but certainly weekly, from hospitals in North Dakota. And so in the chamber, I think, it's going to be a fight. I hope to be able to educate people, do what I do in my regular job, is educate and try to convince people that this is a more healthy alternative than what we're currently using.
You have commitment from any Republican legislators to sign on to the bill?
I'm not requesting anybody sign on the bill. That frankly, this is going to be a charged bill. I don't want people to have to come on as a co-sponsor and then be targeted by any groups that are, frankly, on the pro-life side, that are maybe militant or, there's no sense of exposing multiple people to, the issues that may occur, right? I mean, whether it's hate mail or physical threats or anything else, I think we need to sit back and when I did this, and I've talked to a lot of my colleagues, this is what I assured them. I would not ask them to sign on.
Murph, one thing that I thought was really interesting about your proposal is I think in some ways it's a Rorschach test for people on both sides of the debate, because one thing as a writer, right, who needs to describe these things, is this a pro-life bill or a pro-choice bill? Because I think there's a lot of pro-life people that say, well, it's pro-choice because you're legalizing abortion before 15 weeks. And a lot of pro-choice people would say it's an abortion ban after 15 weeks. Although I realize that there's a window after that, but I'm speaking broadly about how people are going to react to this. In some ways, I think that illustrates perfectly what Roe v. Wade did to the country. Is we started making the policy from courtrooms, and it really the Roe precedent pegged the needle of this debate in one place, where I think it allowed on the right a lot of pro-life people to sort of indulge in some really unworkable policy on abortion because, they could kind of grandstand and they knew the courts were going to keep it from ever really becoming law. Well, now this stuff's becoming law. To your point, we have to get serious about this now. Like the laws that we create are actually going to impact real people. They're not going to be set aside by a court. It's going to actually be the law. I think that's what we just saw a North Dakota News Cooperative poll come out, pointing out that a majority of people don't like the current law. A majority of people would like to see the number of weeks where abortion is legal expanded. I think if you look national, you look at polls from like Gallup that has been tracking this over time, most Americans want a ban in the ballpark of about 12 to 15 weeks. So to me, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking at this bill and understanding there's a debate and maybe there's some tweaks we can make, but this seems to be what the public wants. This seems to be what most Americans, and I would argue maybe even most North Dakotans, even in this blood red state, this seems to be what they want.
Well, and I think, Rob, I mean, I'll be honest, one time I said to people in the chamber during a caucus meeting, who in here is not pro-life? I mean, who in here is pro-death? The first person who's pro-death, go, take care of yourself. All right. We're all pro-life. I mean, I've got kids, I've got grandkids. I've held a dead 3.5-year-old grandson. I've been down this path, right? But on the other hand, when my former students who are obstetricians are coming to me and saying, we need to do something about this. And the horror stories they tell, in the stories of obstetrics is one of these weird areas that go sideways quick. My wife's had one emergency C-section. My daughter-in-law had an emergency C-section, that if they didn't do it right then, the baby's going to die. And, this is real life, right? Real life isn't, you went out, you had a one-night stand, you got pregnant. Well, gee whiz. And we like to make it a morality play. Right? Instead of making a morality play, I mean, I'll be quite honest. Next Thursday is Reproductive Pharmacology Day. And, I'll be talking about Plan B and other pharmacologic methods. There's no reason for a woman to have a unwanted pregnancy in today's world. Okay, Plan B is over the counter, right? And so there's no real reason. So we have to move away from the morality play and ask, what about that woman and really a couple who have a real medical issue? And I don't walk in your shoes, you don't walk in mine, But should they have that tool in their toolbox? Should they have that option to make? And, you might say, I will have a Down syndrome baby. I'm going to do that. My wife and I, we agree. And George Will had a fantastic editorial on Down syndrome a fair number of years ago that was very riveting. And I would say Down's, but I can't make that choice for somebody else. We just can't do that. And, frankly, not everybody wants to go down that path.
Murph, one of the things I like about, the way you're talking about this, but also the way that this bill is struck, there is a bit of protection for doctors as well, right? I mean, after the 16 to 26 week period, it's not just one doctor making the decision. You've set up like a panel at that hospital to help make the decision. I mean, we've all heard the horror stories around the country of doctors not knowing what they're supposed to do with the law. Can you talk a little bit about what the purpose of this panel is? And was that what you're thinking, to sort of give a little bit of community to that doctor making this tough decision with the patient?
Well, I think it's a checks and balances, right? What we don't want is a abortion happy doctor to be taking babies or fetuses, aborting them for no clear medical reason. You have 0 through 15 weeks to make a hard decision. Okay. If a person is a woman or a couple, ideally a couple, is struggling with that decision, in a way, that's pretty much telling them where they sit. Okay. But after that point in time, it was, I'll tell you where that came from. I was the advisor for college Republicans last year, and the vice president was from Norway. And we were discussing this. He rode with us down to and back from the convention, and we were talking about abortion and sort of what goes on in Norway. And he highlighted that they have this committee to sort of make sure it's medically necessary. And that adds that checks and balances, that this is really more of a healthcare oriented bill. And, that allows for 3 physicians who are knowledgeable in the area of healthcare to provide for that. And somebody in the chamber said, well, you should make this long list of things. And I'm like, you can't make a long list of things, because as soon as you make a long list, there's the 10 things you left off, right? And so we need to let physicians do what they're trained to do, okay? And if you talk to obstetricians, nobody wants to do an abortion. I haven't ran into a single person in the medical area, at least in Grand Forks, that will tell me, oh yeah, I want to do abortions left, right, and center. And most women at that time don't want to lose a baby. I mean, these are hard decisions. And yet, I always give this thought. Let's say a woman has to go for a DNC down in Minneapolis. Okay. The husband and wife, they go down to the hospital in Minneapolis. The grandkids are going to stay at grandma and grandpa's house. They start getting in there, and all of a sudden she's hemorrhaging. They're not going to save her. She's dying. She's dying in a hospital in Minneapolis without her children there, without a clergy person there, whatever their view of that might be, without maybe other family members there. Whereas, if that's happening in Grand Forks, I mean, they may not get to the hospital in time, but maybe they do. And those kids can have their last goodbye to mom. And think about the humanity of that. Okay. And we can say, oh yeah, but that rarely happens. Yeah, but when you're that person, it happens to, right? I mean, think of the children. Mom doesn't want to lose this baby, but she's got to. What are you going to do if it goes sideways? And so I always try to think of this from more of a humanity point of view, a little bit of empathy and understanding what people may go through. And, that's where I sit. So why the committee? The committee is to assure the physician and the public that 3 individuals knowledgeable in this space look at the situation, look at the case, look at the doctor's notes, and say, we approve. Or alternatively, we don't approve.
One thing that I learned about public policy in, 2 decades plus of writing about it is that when we debate it, we debate about its impacts in the aggregate, because that's what we're talking about, is how will this proposal apply to our
Sure.
society. But when we experience public policy, we experience it as an individual. So would you say, well, that doesn't happen very often? Oh, but it happens. And when you experience it in the property tax debate that we just got done talking about, how often are people kicked out of their homes because they can't pay their property taxes? Well, not very often. But when it happens once to you or to somebody that you love, it's meaningful in a big, big way. So I think that's important to keep in mind. These panels interest me a lot. Is there, I mean, and I am not, you are, I don't have a lot of expertise in how the medical industry works on some of this. I understand from some of the medical dramas I watch on television that they have, it seems like they have like surgical panels. And I guess my question is, what is the precedent for this? Like, is the medical community already doing stuff like this when they have a hard decision to make about somebody's care, where they bring in and turn it into sort of a community? Is that already happening in some, because it's happening on TV? Yeah, they happen in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, I think physicians routinely will ask somebody with more knowledge base in an area to come in and look at a situation. I think that's pretty routine. It doesn't mean I don't think it's a formal process. I think it's more informal, right? My neighbor's a surgeon. A young surgeon could call him in and say, hey, I got this. How do you deal with this? And it's a learning experience because we're always learning, right? And so, but I think in this situation, the main thing was to add that checks and balances for public reassurance that these are medically necessary. And that, I think, is an important element. I enjoyed the conversation and thinking about it. I reflected a lot. And in fact, that's why I do when I mow yard, I think about abortion bills, amongst other bills. And so, I think when I look at this lens, through this lens that I view this through, that gives that checks and balances to assure that it's being done for the right reasons. And I think that's important for the public. And now an emergency, she's in the parking lot hemorrhaging. No, we're not getting a committee together and they're not looking at it. That's an emergency situation. And physicians know emergency, non-emergency. I don't think you're going to see any abuse of this, right? Oh, well, it was an emergency. No, they're going to take it to the committee because at the end of the day, they want to reassure the public that they're doing the right thing. And this is important for our healthcare community to be able to perform healthcare in North Dakota on their patients.
Murph, have you had conversations with the North Dakota Medical Association or the North Dakota Hospitals Association, and do they have an opinion?
I've talked to the Hospital Association. I've talked tangentially to the North Dakota Medical Association, and we've spoken about it. I think they're all trying to feel what's the elephant going to look like in the room, so to speak. And I know I had some, I've had conversations with, hospital CEOs, where they sort of sit on this, some of them. And everybody's viewing this as a politically charged topic. And, we'll see where it goes. But I think it's time to have the discussion.
I agree with that. And I can understand why they want to shy away from it, because it is charged and it's kind of a no-win topic. Like I said, I mean, this is a Rorschach test, because it's not just going to be maybe pro-life people who are against this. I imagine there's going to be pro-choice people who are against this too, who view it as an unconscionable restriction from their point of view on what they perceive as a constitutional right. This is really tough. But I agree with you. I think in some ways we have to get out of the Roe v. Wade era mindset and realize we have to make real world policy now. The courts aren't going to step in and dictate things. We're not going to have black robed legislators doing it anymore. Our legislatures have to be serious about this, and we have to be intentional about this. And I guess I like this. This is a serious minded bill that seeks to stake out real middle ground on a contentious issue. If you can imagine middle ground on abortion. But again, when you look at the public opinion surveys, I think that's what the public wants. I think they want a middle ground.
Well, and this is what we're trying to do, right? Ultimately. And it was interesting. I had, I won't name colleagues, but I had a conversation with a member of the House. It's a Democrat. And, this individual, she said, well, but that's not good enough. I'm like, nobody's getting what they want. Okay. This isn't a pro-life bill. It's not a pro-choice bill. This is a bill to enable proper medical care to occur in the area of obstetrics in the state of North Dakota. That's what this bill's about. And I think we need to appreciate that and understand that's the direction. And I will say this: I did have about a 2-hour breakfast meeting with former Congressman Pomeroy on this issue. And this summer, and Earl and I sat over at Perkins over by the hospital, and we had breakfast and we talked a lot about this bill. And, I asked Congressman Pomeroy, I says, you voted for ACA and you knew that was going to be the end of your career in North Dakota. Was it worth it? And he said, yes.
Is that what you're saying? I mean, do you feel like this could be the end of your political career?
It could go one way or the other. I mean, I would rather people see me as a bold person who's willing to tackle hard issues in an appropriately well thought out manner. But frankly, we live in a charged political environment where we have these two poles, and then we have 10% and 10%, and then the 80% in the middle who get along. And I went to this conference this summer that was 50 of us were chosen from across the U.S. to attend out at University of Virginia. I was the first person to speak, and we were reviewing Inskeep's book on Lincoln. So I said, look, the issue we have today that is as polarizing as slavery is abortion. Think about it. There's a religious side of it. There's the religious, very hardcore religious folks who say God's law is greater than man's law. Therefore, we can do whatever on slavery. We have a similar issue here, and we have an information revolution going on with AI and all the things around that. And in Lincoln's time, it was the telegraph. Something happened in Kansas City. They knew in Springfield, Illinois, that happened within minutes, right? I mean, that was an information revolution. And this book is great because it talks about how Lincoln navigated these waters. He was humble, he had humility, but he sought to learn and tried to piece together the best approach, right? And, one reason I'm a Republican is I'm an abolitionist. I don't believe in slavery, right? But, at the end of the day, no matter what form you see the slavery in, but at the end of the day, I saw a parallel between what I was trying to do, not trying to equate myself to Lincoln, but sort of where we are today as a nation and where we were then between 1840 and 1860. And it's sort of the same length of fight on another highly charged issue. And, so interesting.
I have maybe a final question here. You said at the outset you weren't going to ask other colleagues to get on this bill because you didn't want them to have to take, the arrows and that kind of thing. You just said you think this could be, the end of your political career because it's so politically charged. Have you experienced, since this became public in the last several days, any sort of nasty grams, any sort of phone calls, any sort of that stuff yet?
No, and I'm very pleased about that, right? I think we as a nation need to move beyond where everything's, I don't like something, boom, I'm sending out a nasty gram, or I'm doing something on social media that I can lob grenades at people without any kind of retribution.
We're living in an era where a health insurance CEO was just gunned down in Manhattan by all evidence now appearing that was politically motivated. Some sort of.
And some people are cheering it on social media afterwards. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but I will say this: I don't know what's being written about this in certain circles because I generally don't involve myself in those circles. I'm sure there's people who are going to be quite upset, and it is not beyond my thought that people will be sending things or emails or alternatively maybe social media. But there's Facebook's pages I just don't go to. Life is a lot simpler that way, right?
Yeah, and then you don't have to see our stupid faces in social media posts when we.
Rob, you started this by talking about our faces being big and stupid. Now you're ending it with our faces being big and stupid.
Well, it's on this show we like to deal in facts. So, all right, we're gonna.
So I'm joining you guys in that. Murph, you're a handsome fellow. You're a handsome fellow. You're the only one who shaved me.
Just showing off that hair a little bit, don't you think, Port?
Oh my gosh, I am so jealous of your hair, Murph. It's ridiculous. I would take off my hat and show you mine, but nobody wants to see that.
You know what my new nickname is in the house?
I don't know.
Flair.
Rick. That works. That absolutely works.
Dick Evanston and Jason Doctor coming up with that, and I'm just like, all right, guys.
Murph,
jealousy is high.
Well, Murph, I'm glad you brought this bill up. I think it's an important debate, and I think I think it's time, left, right, that we got serious. We have to be intentional about this. And a criticism I've made about Democrats, by the way, is that they haven't put a proposal on the table. We're living in an era where we have to legislate this stuff. So if you want to do it, put the ideas on the table and let's hash it out and let's try to find something that maybe we don't all like, but we can all live with. Anyway, Murph, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Yep. Thank you so much.
That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. My giant stupid face